The radio crackled with static, then silence. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Ghost Ramirez pressed his back against the crumbling concrete wall, feeling the heat from the burning Humvee behind him seep through his tactical vest. 3 clicks to the north, his team was pinned down by insurgent fire, and the extraction window was closing fast. He'd called for air support 17 minutes ago. Command had been clear. No birds available, weather too heavy, mission too hot. But something was wrong with that silence. Not the absence of sound, the presence of something else entirely. A low rumble that didn't belong to the diesel generators or the distant artillery. Ghost tilted his head, straining to hear over the crack of AK-47s echoing through the valley. There it was again, deeper, mechanical, coming from above. "Actual, this is Bravo 6, he whispered into his headset, eyes scanning the thick cloud cover that had been their curse all morning. "Are you showing any friendlies in our airspace?" Static then, negative Bravo 6, all air assets grounded, weather's still soup up there. The rumble grew louder. Ghost's team, 5 Navy SEALs who'd seen everything from Fallujah to Kandahar, exchanged glances. Petty Officer Rodriguez, their comms specialist, was already adjusting frequencies, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision. The sound was unmistakable now, turboprops, heavy transport, but command had been absolute, no air support was coming. "Ghost," whispered Corpsman Hayes, pointing skyward with 2 fingers. "You hearing that?" Through the gray morning haze, a shadow began to take shape. Massive, angular, descending through clouds that should have been impenetrable to any sane pilot. The C-130 Hercules emerged like something out of a fever dream, its 4 Allison T-56 engines cutting through the storm with surgical precision. No identification markers visible. No radio chatter. Just the steady, purposeful drone of an aircraft that had no business being there. Rodriguez's radio suddenly came alive. "Bravo 6, this is Spectre 7-1. Heard you boys might need a ride." The voice was calm, almost conversational, female, with just the slightest hint of a Tennessee drawl that somehow made the chaos around them feel manageable. Ghost felt something shift in his chest, not hope exactly, but recognition. He'd heard stories about pilots like this. Legends, mostly. The kind of aviator who showed up when everyone else said it was impossible. "Spectre 7-1, this is Bravo 6 actual," Ghost responded, keeping his voice steady despite the adrenaline. "We've got 5 souls requiring immediate extraction. LZ is hot, visibility near 0. A pause, then, "Copy that, Bravo 6. I can see your smoke, pop green for confirmation." Ghost nodded to Hayes, who pulled the pin on a green smoke grenade. Within seconds, fluorescent green billowed up through the gray morning air, a beacon of hope in an otherwise hopeless situation. The C-130 banked hard left, its massive frame cutting through the clouds with an elegance that seemed to defy physics. Whoever was flying that bird knew exactly what they were doing, and Ghost was beginning to suspect this wasn't going to be an ordinary extraction. The aircraft's engines shifted pitch, and Ghost realized they were about to witness something extraordinary. The question wasn't whether this mysterious pilot could pull off the impossible. It was why command had claimed no air support was available when clearly someone was willing to risk everything to bring them home. In the distance, insurgent fire intensified. Time was running out. But for the first time in hours, Ghost allowed himself to believe they might actually make it out alive. The C-130 continued its descent, and Ghost found himself wondering who exactly was behind the controls of that massive aircraft. Whoever they were, they just changed everything. The mission parameters had shifted. This was no longer about survival. It was about trust. And Ghost was about to place his team's lives in the hands of a pilot whose voice carried the kind of quiet confidence that only came from someone who'd been tested by fire and emerged stronger. The rumble of those 4 engines was becoming a symphony of salvation, cutting through the morning air like a promise. As the C-130 leveled off for its approach, Ghost felt the familiar tingle of anticipation that came before every successful mission. This wasn't going to be just any extraction. This was going to be something they'd talk about for years to come. The pilot's voice crackled through the radio again, and Ghost noticed something else. Beneath that Tennessee drawl was steel. Pure, uncompromising steel. Bravo 6, recommend you and your team prepare for immediate departure. This LZ is about to get very interesting. Ghost smiled for the first time all day. Interesting was exactly what they needed. The C-130 Hercules, tail number barely visible through the morning haze, continued its impossible descent through clouds that meteorology said were impenetrable. But meteorology hadn't accounted for Lieutenant Colonel Victoria Reaper Thorne, call sign earned not through violence, but through her uncanny ability to harvest successful missions from scenarios that should have ended in body bags. At 34, she'd accumulated more flight hours in hostile airspace than pilots twice her age, and her reputation in Air Mobility Command was the stuff of legend. Inside the cockpit, Reaper's hands moved across the controls with practiced precision. Her co-pilot, Captain James "Steady" Morrison, watched the altimeter with barely concealed anxiety. They were flying through weather that had grounded every other aircraft in theater, navigating by instruments alone through soup so thick it seemed solid. Reaper, visibility is still 00, Steady said, his voice tight with concern. We're flying blind into a hot LZ with mountains on 3 sides. This is suicide. Reaper's response was calm, almost meditative. Steady, you see those peaks as obstacles. I see them as cover. Every mountain that can kill us is also hiding us from surface-to-air missiles. She adjusted trim with minute movements, feeling the aircraft's response through her fingertips. Besides, those SEALs down there didn't call for the easy extraction. They called for the impossible one. The loadmaster's voice crackled through the intercom. Colonel, we've got visual on the green smoke. LZ is approximately 800 meters ahead, bearing 020. Reaper's eyes never left the instruments, but her voice carried a hint of satisfaction. Copy, load, prep for combat landing. Full reverse on touchdown, engines hot for immediate departure. Below them, the world was chaos. Insurgent forces had Ghost's team surrounded on 3 sides, automatic weapons fire creating deadly crossfire patterns that made any ground-based extraction impossible. The only clear approach was from the north, a narrow valley that funneled aircraft directly over enemy positions, making them sitting ducks for RPGs and heavy machine guns. It was exactly the kind of tactical nightmare that had ended careers and lives, which was precisely why Command had ruled out air support. Too risky, too many variables, too likely to result in the loss of both the rescue team and the aircraft crew. But Reaper had built her reputation on missions that others deemed impossible. Her service record read like fiction. Extractions from Syria under active bombardment, medical evacuations from Afghanistan through zero visibility conditions, supply drops in Iraq that had saved entire forward operating bases from being overrun. She keyed the radio. Bravo 6, this is Spectre 7-1. I need you to mark your exact position with IR strobe. We're coming in hot and fast, 1 pass only. Ghost's response was immediate. Spectre 7-1, strobes are active. Be advised, enemy contact from multiple directions. We're in a crossfire situation down here. Copy that, Bravo 6. Enemy contact noted and appreciated. There was something in Reaper's voice, not quite amusement, but definitely confidence. Recommend you and your team prepare for rapid boarding. This is going to be a short field landing. Steady shot her a look. Short field. Reaper, that LZ is barely 400 meters of rough terrain. We need at least 600 for a normal landing, and that's in perfect conditions. Reaper's smile was barely visible in the green glow of the instrument panel. Steady. Normal is what got those boys pinned down in the first place. We're not doing normal today. She pushed the yoke forward, beginning their final descent through clouds that seemed determined to hide every landmark, every reference point that would make this landing possible. The C-130's engines roared as she adjusted power, feeling for that perfect balance between speed and control that would get them down alive. In the cargo bay, the loadmaster was already positioning equipment for rapid departure. Two crew chiefs checked and rechecked their weapons, knowing that once they touched down, this transport aircraft would become a target for every insurgent within 5 kilometers. The extraction had to be flawless. Anything less meant casualties. Through her headset, Reaper could hear the increasing intensity of ground fire. Ghost's team was running out of time, and enemy forces were closing in. The window for extraction was measured in minutes now, maybe less. But Victoria Thorne hadn't earned the call sign Reaper by playing it safe. The C-130 broke through the cloud deck at 300 feet, revealing a landscape that looked like the surface of another planet. Brown, rocky terrain stretched in every direction, broken by deep ravines and scattered with the burned-out husks of vehicles from previous engagements. The green smoke from Ghost's position was a bright beacon in the desolation, but it was surrounded by muzzle flashes and the telltale dust clouds of incoming mortar rounds. Reaper's voice was steady over the radio. "Bravo 6, I have visual on your position. Recommend you prepare your team for immediate movement. We'll be on the ground for approximately 60 seconds. Roger that, Spectre 7-1, we're ready." But as Reaper lined up for final approach, she could see the full scope of the tactical situation. Ghost's team wasn't just pinned down, they were about to be overrun. Enemy forces were moving in from 3 directions, using the terrain to close distance while maintaining covering fire. It was a textbook encirclement, executed with precision that spoke to professional military training. This wasn't just an extraction anymore. It was a race against time, with 5 lives hanging in the balance. And Victoria Reaper Thorne was the only thing standing between those SEALs and a very bad ending to what had started as a routine reconnaissance mission. The C-130's landing gear locked into position with mechanical precision, and Reaper began her final approach into hell. The insurgents had positioned themselves well. As Reaper brought the C-130 lower, she could see muzzle flashes from elevated positions on both sides of the valley. Classic ambush configuration designed to catch aircraft in devastating crossfire. Whoever was commanding the enemy forces knew their business. They'd turned this extraction into a shooting gallery, with her aircraft as the target. "Steady, I need you to call out altitude and airspeed," Reaper said, her voice calm despite the tracer rounds beginning to streak past their windscreen. "Load, prep the ramp for immediate deployment. This is going to be a hot pickup." The loadmaster's voice was steady. "Ramp and door ready, Colonel. Medical kit staged for potential casualties." Through the tactical frequency, Ghost's voice cut through the static. "Spectre 7-1, be advised. Enemy forces are converging on the LZ. You've got RPGs at your 2 and 10 o'clock positions." Reaper absorbed the information without changing her approach angle. RPGs were line-of-sight weapons, deadly accurate but limited by terrain. The key was speed and unpredictability. Get in fast, stay low, and never give the enemy a stable target. "Copy, Bravo 6, keep your heads down, we're coming in." The C-130 descended through increasingly heavy ground fire, its massive frame somehow graceful despite the violence erupting around it. At 200 feet, an RPG streaked past the port wing, close enough that Steady flinched involuntarily. Reaper didn't even blink. "Steady, I need you to monitor engine parameters. If we take damage, I need to know immediately." "Roger, all engines nominal, hydraulics good, electrical systems normal." But normal was about to change dramatically. As they descended past 100 feet, the enemy fire intensified. Small arms rounds began impacting the aircraft's belly, the distinctive crack thump of bullets striking aluminum audible even over the engine noise. One round spiderwebbed the co-pilot's side window, sending crystalline fractures across Steady's field of view. Jesus, Reaper. Stay with me, Steady, we're almost there. Ghost's team had taken position behind a low stone wall, providing what cover they could find in the open terrain. From Reaper's perspective, they looked impossibly small and vulnerable, 5 figures crouched against the vastness of the hostile landscape. But she could see their discipline in the way they moved, the professional spacing that kept them from bunching up into a single target. Bravo 6, pop red smoke to mark final approach path. I need a clear corridor. Ghost's response was immediate. Red smoke began billowing from a position 50 meters ahead of their defensive position, creating a visual reference line for Reaper's landing approach. It was a good call. The smoke would also help obscure the aircraft's final moments before touchdown. The C-130's main landing gear touched rough ground at 120 miles per hour, far faster than any normal landing. Reaper immediately deployed thrust reversers, the 4 turboprop engines screaming as they fought to slow the massive aircraft. Dust and debris erupted around them, creating an instant sandstorm that provided additional concealment from enemy fire. Ramp down, Reaper called over the intercom. Load, get them aboard now. The cargo ramp dropped with hydraulic efficiency, revealing the interior of the aircraft to Ghost's team. They didn't hesitate. 5 figures sprinted across open ground, their movements coordinated despite the chaos erupting around them. Enemy fire intensified, but the dust cloud from the landing was working in their favor, making accurate targeting nearly impossible. Ghost was the last man aboard, turning to provide covering fire as his team loaded. Reaper could see him in her mirrors, a professional doing his job under impossible circumstances. When he finally sprinted up the ramp, the loadmaster was already signaling for immediate departure. All aboard, came the call. Ramp coming up. Reaper didn't wait for the ramp to fully close. She pushed the throttles forward, and the C-130 began its takeoff roll while still taking enemy fire. An RPG exploded 20 meters off the port wing, close enough to rock the aircraft but not close enough to cause structural damage. As they lifted off, Reaper keyed the radio. Bravo 6, welcome aboard. Next stop is significantly less hostile. Ghost's voice came through the intercom, slightly breathless but steady. Spectre 7-1, that was the finest piece of flying I've ever seen. Who the hell are you? For the first time during the entire mission, Reaper allowed herself a small smile. Just someone who doesn't like leaving people behind. But even as they climbed towards safer altitude, Reaper knew this mission was far from over. They'd gotten the SEALs out, but enemy forces would be tracking their departure route, and surface-to-air missiles had a way of reaching out and touching aircraft that thought they were safe. The real test was just beginning. 20 minutes into their flight toward the forward operating base, the threat warning system began its distinctive warble, the sound every military pilot dreaded. Someone had locked onto them with radar, and that someone had missiles. Reaper's hands moved instinctively to the defensive countermeasures panel, prepping chaff and flare dispensers for immediate deployment. Steady, talk to me about that radar contact. Steady's fingers danced across the electronic warfare displays, interpreting the symbols and signatures that would determine their survival. Single emitter, bearing 270, approximately 15 nautical miles. Signature matches SA-3 system, old Soviet hardware but still lethal. In the cargo bay, Ghost had moved forward to the flight deck, drawn by the professional tone in Reaper's voice that suggested their problems weren't over. He could see both pilots working with calm efficiency, hands moving across controls with practiced precision. Whatever was happening, they dealt with similar threats before. Colonel, Ghost said, using her rank for the first time, my team has experience with SA-3 systems. If you need tactical input. Reaper glanced back at him, and Ghost got his first clear look at the pilot who just pulled off the impossible. She was younger than he'd expected, with short auburn hair and green eyes that seemed to process information at light speed. But it was her expression that struck him. Complete focus, zero panic, the kind of calm that came from someone who'd been in similar situations and emerged victorious. "Ghost, right now I need your team to strap in tight. We're about to get creative with our flight path." The threat warning system's tone shifted, becoming more urgent. They'd gone from being tracked to being actively targeted. Reaper's response was immediate. She pushed the C-130 into a dive that seemed to defy the aircraft's design parameters, using terrain masking to break the radar lock. "Reaper," Steady said, his voice tight with strain, "we're exceeding design limitations." "The design limitations assume we want to live forever," she replied, pulling out of the dive at an altitude that left very little margin for error. "Right now, I'm more interested in living through the next 5 minutes." The terrain rushed past below them, rocky hills and deep ravines that provided natural radar shadows. Reaper was flying nap of the earth, using every ridge and valley to mask their signature from the SA-3 site. It was exhausting flying, requiring split-second timing and perfect coordination between pilot and aircraft. Ghost watched the altimeter fluctuate between 50 and 200 feet above ground level, the needle dancing as Reaper used every contour of the landscape. He'd seen combat flying before, but this was something different. This was artistry applied to warfare, with the margin for error measured in feet rather than miles. "Contact lost," Steady reported. "We're in their radar shadow." But Reaper didn't relax. "That just means they can't see us right now. The minute we pop up, we're back in the game. Load, how much fuel are we carrying?" The loadmaster's voice came through the intercom. "Approximately 4 hours remaining at current consumption, Colonel." "Copy, Ghost. How critical is immediate medical attention for your team?" Ghost did a quick assessment of his men. Rodriguez had taken shrapnel in his left arm, and Hayes had a possible concussion from the mortar blast that had started their whole predicament, but nothing immediately life-threatening. "We can handle a longer flight if necessary, Colonel. What are you thinking?" Reaper's smile was grim. "I'm thinking the direct route home just became significantly more dangerous. We're going to take the scenic route, swing south through the mountains, use terrain masking to stay invisible. It'll add 2 hours to our flight time, but it keeps us alive." As if summoned by her words, the threat warning system activated again. Different tone, different bearing. A second radar system had acquired them, this one from the northeast. They were being bracketed, caught between overlapping missile coverage that would make any conventional approach to friendly airspace extremely hazardous. "Well," Reaper said, her voice carrying a note of anticipation rather than concern, "this just got interesting." Ghost found himself grinning despite their predicament. He was beginning to understand why this pilot had the reputation she did. Most aviators would be looking for the safest way out of this situation. Victoria Thorne was treating it like a puzzle to be solved, a challenge to be met with skill and determination. In the cargo bay, his team had settled into the webbed seats, weapons secured but ready. They'd been in tight spots before, but never while completely dependent on someone else's expertise for survival. It was a new experience for SEALs accustomed to controlling their own destiny. But watching Reaper work, Ghost felt a growing confidence that they were in capable hands. This wasn't just competent flying, this was mastery. And mastery, applied under pressure, had a way of making the impossible seem inevitable. The C-130 banked hard left, beginning a route through mountain passes that would test both aircraft and pilot to their absolute limits. But for the first time since this mission began, Ghost was looking forward to seeing how it would end. The mountain pass Reaper had chosen was barely wide enough for the C-130's 132-foot wingspan. At 200 feet above the rocky floor, with granite walls rising on both sides, it was the kind of flying that separated exceptional pilots from the merely competent. Steady's knuckles were white on the control yoke, ready to take over if Reaper showed any sign of spatial disorientation. But Reaper flew like the mountains were old friends, banking and adjusting with minute control inputs that kept them centered in the narrow corridor. Her eyes moved constantly, instruments, terrain, back to instruments, building a mental picture of their position that went beyond what any GPS could provide. "Ghost," she called over the intercom, "I need you to understand something about our current situation." Ghost moved closer to the flight deck, nodding the concentration on both pilots' faces. "What's that, Colonel?" "Those SA-3 sites aren't random. Someone knew we were coming, knew our likely extraction routes, and positioned assets accordingly. This wasn't opportunistic, this was planned." The implication hit Ghost immediately. Intelligence leak. Someone on the friendly side had provided information that put his team at risk and nearly cost them their lives. It explained the precision of the ambush, the professional execution of the encirclement tactics. Any thoughts on who might have that kind of access? Reaper's expression remained neutral, but Ghost caught the subtle tightening around her eyes. "Above my pay grade, Commander, but I've seen this pattern before, too many coincidences, too much accurate information on enemy positions. Someone's playing both sides." The C-130 emerged from the mountain pass into broader airspace, but Reaper kept them low, using ridgelines and valleys to maintain concealment. The fuel consumption was higher at low altitude, but exposure to radar was significantly reduced. It was a calculated trade-off that prioritized immediate survival over long-term resources. "Colonel," Steady said, monitoring their navigation systems, "we're approaching the border of friendly airspace. Should I contact approach control?" Reaper considered for a moment. "Negative. Radio silence until we're on final approach. If there's a leak in intelligence, we don't want to advertise our position any more than necessary." It was sound tactical thinking, but it also meant flying through controlled airspace without clearance, a career-ending violation under normal circumstances. But nothing about this mission had been normal, and Reaper seemed comfortable making decisions that prioritized mission success over regulatory compliance. Ghost watched the pilot work, impressed by her ability to maintain situational awareness while managing the complex flight dynamics of terrain following. She was processing information from multiple sources: instruments, visual references, radio communications, and synthesizing it all into tactical decisions that kept them alive. "Reaper," he said, using her call sign for the first time, "where did you learn to fly like this?" Her smile was brief but genuine. "Test pilot school, combat search and rescue, and about 15 years of practice in places where mistakes get you killed." She adjusted trim slightly, compensating for a crosswind that was barely detectable. "But mostly, I learned from watching good pilots die because they followed standard procedures in non-standard situations." The comment hung in the air like a challenge to conventional thinking. Ghost had spent enough time in special operations to understand the sentiment. Sometimes survival required operating outside established parameters, making decisions that looked reckless to outside observers but were based on deep tactical knowledge. "How many of these impossible extractions have you pulled off?" Reaper glanced at the fuel gauges before responding. "Officially, this is a routine transport mission. Unofficially, let's just say I've gotten good at bringing people home when everyone else says it can't be done." The radio crackled with distant chatter, other aircraft in the area, ground control coordinating traffic patterns, the normal symphony of military aviation. But Reaper kept their own radio silent, maintaining the electronic invisibility that had gotten them this far safely. As they flew deeper into friendly territory, Ghost began to relax slightly. The immediate tactical threats were behind them, replaced by the longer-term challenge of explaining how an unauthorized rescue mission had taken place in airspace that was supposedly too dangerous for flight operations. But that was a problem for staff officers and intelligence analysts. Right now, his team was alive because someone had been willing to ignore orders, break protocols, and risk their career to do what was right. In Ghost's experience, that kind of moral courage was rarer than technical skill and infinitely more valuable. The C-130 continued its low-level flight toward home base, carrying 5 grateful SEALs and the growing legend of a pilot who didn't believe in impossible missions. 40 minutes from their destination, Reaper finally broke radio silence. Her transmission was brief and professional, requesting immediate landing clearance and priority handling for returning personnel. She didn't elaborate on the circumstances, didn't explain why they were arriving unannounced from a direction that wasn't on any filed flight plan. The tower controller's response carried a note of confusion. Spectre 7-1, we show no scheduled arrivals for your tail number. Please state the nature of your flight. Reaper's reply was diplomatic but firm. Tower, Spectre 7-1 requesting immediate landing with returning personnel. Details will be provided through appropriate channels upon arrival. There was a pause, the kind of silence that meant someone was making phone calls and checking computer systems. Finally, Spectre 7-1 cleared direct approach runway 27, medical team standing by as requested. As they descended through the traffic pattern, Ghost could see the base spread out below them. Hangars, administrative buildings, the familiar geometry of military order imposed on the landscape. But something was different about this arrival. Emergency vehicles were positioned near the taxiway, and more people than usual were visible on the flight line. Looks like we're expected, Ghost observed. Reaper nodded, her attention focused on the landing checklist. Word travels fast in military circles. By now, half the base knows something unusual happened. The landing was smooth and professional, a stark contrast to their departure from the combat zone. As they taxied toward the parking ramp, Ghost could see uniformed figures waiting for them, including several with rank insignia that suggested this debriefing would involve senior leadership. Ghost, Reaper said as she shut down the engines, whatever questions they ask you, remember that your team is alive because someone decided to interpret orders creatively. How you characterize that decision might affect whether similar creative interpretations are possible in the future. It was as close to asking for cover as she was likely to get, a subtle reminder that careers could be made or broken based on how this mission was officially reported. Ghost understood the implication and respected the way she'd presented it, not as a direct request, but as information he could use to make his own decision. Colonel, as far as my team is concerned, you performed a routine extraction under difficult weather conditions. Your flying was professional, your decisions were sound, and your crew was exemplary. Reaper's smile was brief but warm. Appreciate that, Commander. The cargo ramp lowered, revealing a group of officers that included the base commander, intelligence personnel, and medical staff. Ghost's team filed out with their equipment, moving with the easy professionalism that marked them as special operations veterans. But before Ghost disembarked, he turned back to Reaper. Colonel, if you ever need a ground team for anything creative, you know where to find us. It was an offer of mutual support that transcended rank and service branch, recognition that some missions required people willing to operate outside normal parameters. Reaper acknowledged it with a nod that conveyed understanding and appreciation. As Ghost walked down the ramp toward the waiting officers, he knew this mission would become part of his personal legend. The day when air support came from someone everyone said wouldn't come. But more importantly, it would become part of Victoria Thorne's growing reputation as a pilot who could make the impossible routine. The debrief was going to be interesting. The base commander, Brigadier General Patricia Hayes, was waiting at the bottom of the ramp with an expression that suggested she was still processing the implications of an unauthorized rescue mission. Her staff officers flanked her, notepads ready, faces carefully neutral. This wasn't going to be a casual conversation. "Commander Ramirez," General Hayes said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to clear answers. "I need to understand exactly how this extraction occurred when my operations staff assured me that no air support was available." Ghost's response was measured and professional. "General, my team was extracted by Spectre 7-1 under challenging weather conditions. The aircrew demonstrated exceptional skill and professionalism throughout the mission. It was technically accurate while avoiding details that might complicate Reaper's situation." General Hayes was experienced enough to recognize the careful phrasing, but she also understood the unspoken message. Whatever had happened, it had saved American lives. "Colonel Thorne," the general said, turning her attention to Reaper as she emerged from the cockpit, "I'll need a full mission report on my desk within the hour. Include weather conditions, tactical situation, and any deviations from standard operating procedures." Reaper came to attention with the crisp precision of an officer who knew her career was being evaluated in real time. "Yes, ma'am. Report will be submitted as requested." But General Hayes wasn't finished. "Colonel, help me understand how you were able to operate in weather conditions that grounded every other aircraft on this base." It was the key question, the one that would determine whether this mission was viewed as heroic improvisation or reckless endangerment. Reaper's answer would set the tone for everything that followed. "General, the weather conditions were challenging but manageable for an experienced crew using appropriate tactical procedures. We maintained safety margins throughout the mission while accomplishing the objective of extracting friendly personnel from a hostile environment." The answer was perfect, acknowledging the difficulty while emphasizing safety and mission success. It positioned the flight as professional judgment rather than reckless abandon, suggesting that other crews might have been overly conservative rather than Reaper being unnecessarily bold. General Hayes studied both officers for a moment, clearly weighing the political and operational implications. An unauthorized rescue mission could generate negative attention from higher headquarters, but 5 dead SEALs would create far worse problems. The math was simple, even if the politics were complex. "Gentlemen," she said to Ghost's team, "report to medical for evaluation, then to intelligence for operational debrief. You'll be released to your parent command within 24 hours." As the SEALs moved toward the waiting vehicles, General Hayes pulled Reaper aside for a private conversation. Ghost couldn't hear the words, but he could read body language. The general's posture was serious but not hostile, more like someone trying to understand options rather than assign blame. "Colonel," General Hayes said quietly, "off the record, how many other crews could have pulled off what you just did?" Reaper considered the question carefully. "Ma'am, every pilot in Air Mobility Command has the technical skills. The difference is willingness to accept calculated risks when American lives are at stake. And in your professional assessment, were the risks you accepted reasonable?" "General, 5 SEALs are alive who would otherwise be dead. From my perspective, that makes the risk calculation straightforward." It was exactly the answer General Hayes needed to hear, not reckless bravado, but clear-eyed professionalism applied to an impossible situation. The kind of decision-making that saved lives and accomplished missions that others deemed impossible. "Colonel, you'll have a formal inquiry to deal with from higher headquarters. They'll want to understand why this mission occurred without proper authorization and coordination." Reaper's expression remained neutral. "Understood, ma'am. I'll cooperate fully with any investigation." But General Hayes stepped closer, lowering her voice to ensure privacy. "Victoria, between you and me, well done. This is the kind of flying that makes careers and saves lives, Don't let the bureaucrats convince you otherwise. It was an endorsement that carried significant weight. General Hayes had risen through the ranks by making tough decisions under pressure, and her support would matter when the inevitable investigation began. But more importantly, it was recognition from a fellow professional that sometimes doing the right thing required operating outside established parameters. As Reaper walked toward the operations building to write her mission report, she knew her career had just taken a significant turn. This mission would either establish her as an elite pilot capable of handling impossible situations, or it would become a cautionary tale about the dangers of unauthorized operations. Either way, 5 SEALs were going home to their families. From her perspective, that made whatever came next entirely worthwhile. 3 weeks later, the formal investigation concluded with a finding that would surprise no one who knew Victoria Thorne's reputation. Pilot demonstrated exceptional judgment under extraordinary circumstances, resulting in successful mission completion with no loss of life or equipment. The bureaucratic language couldn't capture the reality of what had happened, but it officially endorsed her decision-making and cleared the way for future operations. But the real impact of the mission wasn't measured in official findings or career advancement. Word of the extraction had spread through the special operations community with the speed that only military legends achieved. The story grew in the telling. Details became more dramatic, the weather worse, the tactical situation more desperate. Within special operations units across 3 service branches, Reaper became synonymous with impossible rescues and pilots who didn't leave people behind. Her radio call signs started appearing in mission planning discussions whenever someone needed to accomplish something that looked impossible on paper. Colonel Marcus Webb, Ghost's commanding officer, called Reaper personally to request her for a mission that everyone else had declined. The conversation was brief and professional, but it established a pattern that would define the rest of her career. "Colonel Thorne, I have a situation that requires creative aviation solutions. Are you available for temporary assignment?" Reaper's response was characteristic. "Sir, depends on the definition of impossible. If you just need someone to fly around existing problems, there are plenty of qualified pilots. If you need someone to fly through problems that don't officially exist, I'm your pilot." The mission involved extracting a reconnaissance team from territory that was officially neutral but practically hostile, the kind of operation that required plausible deniability and absolutely no paper trail. 3 other pilots had reviewed the mission parameters and declined, citing excessive risk and insufficient support. "Reaper,